This presentation will provide information on Ireland's emissions by trend and sector, the legislative and policy context for climate action in Ireland, and finally we'll provide a short overview of our arrangements and achievements as part of the EU. By way of general background to Ireland's national context, Ireland is a temperate island country situated off the northwest coast of Europe. This mild temperate oceanic climate is the result of a combination of factors, including the warm Gulf Stream and southwesterly winds from the Atlantic. The population is heavily concentrated to the Dublin and eastern region and is highly dispersed and low density outside this region. Ireland has seen a population increase of over 45% since 1990, currently standing at 5.07 million people. This population increase has impacted on Ireland's emission profile, which I will discuss in greater detail further in this presentation. Ireland is a parliamentary democracy and our constitution provides for our structure of government, which includes judicial, executive and legislative branches. Ireland is a member of the European Union. As a member of the EU, Ireland is committed to union-wide emission reduction targets. The EU's Fit for 55 package commits the EU to a 55% reduction in emissions by 2030 and ultimately to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. The interim 2040 target is to be confirmed. Ireland is committed to nationally binding targets at an EU level, which will see Ireland reduce non-ETS sector emissions by 42% by 2030 relative to 2005. This target applies to roughly 75% of all Irish emissions. We can see in this slide Ireland's emissions profile by sector. Agriculture is consistently the largest. Transport has doubled since 1990. The energy share has declined substantially due to a high degree of fuel switching, more efficient generation, as well as renewables. The other sectors have remained stable. The trend in national total emissions, excluding LULUCF from 1990 to 2001, is plus 11.6%. Looking at 2021 in isolation, total national greenhouse gas emissions are estimated to have increased by 5.2% on 2020 levels to 62.11 million tonnes carbon dioxide equivalent. This increase in total emissions was driven by increased use of coal and oil for electricity generation and increases in both the agriculture and transport sectors. Greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector increased by 6.7% in 2021, largely driven by ending of COVID travel restrictions on passenger cars and public transport. Agriculture emissions increased by 3.6% in 2021, driven by increased fertilizer, nitrogen use. Despite the overall positive trend in energy emissions since 1990, in 2021, emissions in the energy industry sector increased by 17.6%. This is attributable to a tripling of coal and oil use in electricity generation at gas-fired plants were offline. A key driver in this increase in emissions is an increase in our population, which has jumped from 3.5 million in 1990 to over 5 million in 2021, a 43% increase. While emissions appear to have increased significantly since 1990, it should be noted that per person emissions reduced from a high of 18.3 tonnes per person in 2001 to 12.3 tonnes per person in 2021, or a reduction of 22.1%. Another key driver in Ireland's increased emissions is economic activity. Because of the globalised nature of the Irish economy, the GNI metric more accurately captures the economic growth that would impact on greenhouse gas emissions. Looking forward, I will now outline Ireland's projected non-ETS emissions to 2030. The ESR provides two flexibilities, EU ETS and LULUCF, to allow for a fair and cost-efficient achievement of the targets. The full LULUCF flexibility of 26.8 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent is not considered to be possible to achieve based on the latest projections. The total amount of LULUCF flexibility now projected to be available is 9.3 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. The projections show that Ireland can achieve compliance under the ESR in the with additional measures scenario using the EU ETS and LULUCF flexibilities with implementation of the Climate Action Plan 2023. Using both flexibilities gives a cumulative surplus under the ESR of 2.2 million tonnes CO2 equivalent. This is a small amount of headroom and highlights the need for full and rapid implementation of policies and measures in the Climate Action Plan 2023. A flexibility is available to Ireland for the purposes of the ESR compliance that relies on the removals Ireland can achieve through action in the LULUCF sector. An emission factor refinement related to forestry and peaty soils has significantly reduced the removals that could count towards using that flexibility. Cognizant of the challenges faced by climate change, Ireland has established a comprehensive legislative and policy framework for addressing climate change nationally. The foundation of this is the 2021 Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act, which sets Ireland's national climate objective of achieving net zero no later than 2050, as well as an intermediate target of a 51% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030. The new framework set out in the 2021 Act requires the delivery of successive climate action plans and long-term climate strategies, supported by a system of carbon budgeting and sectoral emission ceilings to meet our 2030 and 2050 targets. This new framework is supported by appropriate oversight by government, the Oireachtas and the Climate Change Advisory Council, the latter having been established under the 2015 Act. Our climate action plans provide updates on the progress made in meeting Ireland's national climate objective and seek to identify any challenges or obstacles in relation to this progress. The plans also contain actions, measures, plans and policies to meet Ireland's climate goals and emissions targets. They are developed through a cross-government and agency process, ensuring there is buy-in across the system for actions to be met for the following year by each sector. I will provide more detail on our current climate action plan further on in this presentation. Following the process set out in the 2021 Climate Act, a carbon budget programme proposed by the Climate Change Advisory Council was approved by Government on the 21st of February 2022 and subsequently adopted by the Oireachtas since the 6th of April 2022. This carbon budget programme comprises 3 successive 5-year carbon budgets for the following periods: 21 to 25, 295 million tonnes CO2 equivalent, an average reduction of 4.8% per annum. 26 to 30, 200 million tonnes CO2 equivalent, an average reduction of 8.3% per annum. And 2031 to 2035, which is provisional, 151 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent, an average reduction of 3.5% per annum. The 2021 Climate Act requires the Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications to prepare within limits of carbon budgets maximum greenhouse gas emissions permitted within different sectors of the economy. Following engagement between the Department and all relevant departments and agencies, sectorial emission ceilings were prepared and submitted to Cabinet for approval. They came into effect once approved by Government on the 28th of July 2022. The structure of the sectorial emission ceilings seeks to reflect the EPA emissions inventory, which breaks down emissions into a range of categories across the economy. Our current Climate Action Plan, CAP23, was approved by the Government and published on the 21st of December 2022. It is the first action plan delivered on the provisions of the 2021 Climate Act. CAP23 sets out how Ireland can accelerate actions required to respond to the climate crisis, putting climate solutions at the centre of our social and economic development. CAP23 reflects the emission reduction targets set in the carbon budgets and sectorial emission ceilings by including a roadmap of actions for each sector to ensure compliance with the ceilings in the remainder of the first carbon budget period 2023 to 2025, as well as identifying actions to address failure or potential failures in meeting these ceilings. CAP23 also includes potential actions and measures for the second carbon budget 26 to 2030 and an overview of potential policies for the third period of 2031 to 2035. Key measures in CAP23 include electricity, 75% reduction in emissions by 2030 through large-scale deployment of renewables as well as an enabling the electrification of other technologies. The built environment, 40% residential, 45% commercial reduction in emissions by 2030. We'll increase energy efficiency of existing buildings by expanding our retrofitting programme and putting in place policies to deliver zero emissions in new builds. Transport, 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 through the implementation policies to improve town, city and rural planning, improving public transport and active travel programmes, while supporting switch to biofuels and EVs. Agriculture, 25% reduction in emissions by 2030 by significantly reducing our use of chemical nitrogen as a fertiliser, increasing organic farming to up to 450,000 hectares, the area of tillage up to 400,000 hectares. Business and enterprise, 35% reduction in emissions by 2030 by increasing the share of carbon neutral heating to a minimum of 50% by 2025 and 70% by 2030, and growing the circular economy and bioeconomy. A key element of Ireland's plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is the transformation of the energy system. Our Climate Action Plan 2023 commits Ireland to achieving a total target of 80% of our energy demand to come from renewable sources by 2030. Our path to achieving our renewable energy targets has been in progress for a number of years. Our first renewable electricity support scheme, REFIT 1, supported onshore wind, hydroelectricity and biomass landfill gas. REFIT 2 supported onshore wind, hydroelectricity and biomass landfill gas, and was replaced with the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme in 2022, which provides support for renewable electricity projects in Ireland. The Offshore Renewable Electricity Support Scheme commenced in 2022 and provides for dedicated offshore energy auctions to support the technology in Ireland. In order to establish the foundations to underpin the emerging offshore energy sector, Ireland has, and our current energy targets include 6 gigawatts of onshore wind and up to 5 gigawatts of solar by 2025, 9 gigawatts onshore wind, 8 gigawatts solar, and at least 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. Supporting at least 500 megawatts of local community-based renewable energy projects and increased levels of new microgeneration and small-scale generation. Our current rate of progress includes, in October 2023, renewable sources, wind, solar and hydro generated approximately 33% of grid electricity in Ireland. In 2022, almost 37% of Ireland's electricity came from renewable sources. Looking specifically at offshore wind development, we need to accelerate the important mission of delivering offshore wind energy in Ireland over the coming decade at a scale and scope that we perhaps haven't seen since the electrification of the country. The designated maritime area plan will determine the broad area where offshore renewable energy projects can be developed and will act as a management plan for a specific area of Ireland's marine waters. Similarly, onshore wind is continuing to be one of the leading cost-effective technologies to achieve our renewable electricity and greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, as well as displacing emissions in other sectors, including household heating and vehicle transport. Harnessing our wind resource will make a massive contribution towards achieving regional renewable energy self-sufficiency. While mitigation action and emissions reductions are at the forefront of our minds, the 2021 Act requires consideration be given to the need for this to be a just transition. The Climate Action Plan 2023 sets out a mandate for the establishment of a Just Transition Commission, which proposed the following tasks: monitoring the implementation of the Just Transition principles through successive climate action plans, commissioning research to examine which sectors of the economy are most likely to experience disruption as a result of the transition, as well as exploring solutions to mitigate against these challenges. Advising and supporting the Minister and Government in relation to social dialogue in a manner which effectively integrates just transition considerations. Examining specific just transition challenges as requested by the Minister and providing recommendations to Government on potential solutions to mitigate against these challenges. All relevant ministers are expected to formulate and implement their climate action policies through the lens of this framework, so the policies are informed by the need to ensure a just transition. This includes creating sustainable employment opportunities, providing reskilling and retraining opportunities, and providing appropriate supports for those most vulnerable as parts of Ireland's transition to a climate-neutral economy. As part of our commitment to a just transition, not just domestically but globally, international climate finance is a key priority of the Irish Government. At COP26 in Glasgow in 2021, Ireland committed to deliver at least $225 million per year in climate finance to developing countries by 2025. Last year, the Irish Government published Ireland's International Climate Finance Roadmap, which sets out the pathway for realising this target. The roadmap builds on the positive work we have done thus far as a climate finance donor, maintaining a focus on adaptation and resilience in some of the most climate vulnerable countries around the world, particularly least developed countries and small island developing states. Recognising the devastating impact that the climate crisis can have on a country's ability to pay back debt, Ireland understands that access to climate finance is key. Ireland's climate finance is primarily grant-based and is channeled through numerous bilateral and civil society mechanisms, as well as multilateral funds such as the Greek Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility. In 2022, Ireland provided over $115 million in international climate finance, our highest spend to date. This figure represents a more than doubling of Ireland's climate finance since 2015. I shall now turn to address Ireland's progress as part of the EU. As a member of the EU, Ireland is party to and participates towards the meeting of a number of commitments, as described here in this slide. The EU and Member States are all parties to the UNFCCC and to the Paris Agreement. Therefore, we have an internal reporting mechanism to ensure that the EU can fulfil its international obligations. For inventories and projections, the EU is the sum of emissions and removals of its Member States. On the policies and measures, the EU legislation are implemented by Member States and are complementary to Member States' domestic policies. The 2020 Climate and Energy Package underpins the EU implementation of the target under the Convention. 21% reduction target compared to 2005 for emissions covered by the EU ETS, 10% reduction target compared to 2005 for ESD sectors. The 2020 target has been overachieved by the EU. This means the EU and its member states jointly met their target by implementing the 2020 EU Climate and Energy Package. While the conditions for the EU to move to a 30% reduction by 2020 compared to 1990 levels have not been met, the 2020 achievement is beyond that. In 2019, the EU greenhouse gas emissions had already reached a 24% reduction. Compared with 2019, emissions fell by almost 10 points in 2020, an unprecedented temporary fall in emissions due to the pandemic. Thank you, and the Department will be pleased to receive your questions.